This is the final installment of our 4-part video series on issuing high-yield bonds in Asia to offer you key takeaways on this topic in minutes. If you've not viewed the last 3 videos, check the info bar for the links. In the last video, I spoke about one of the most common covenants, the debt covenant. Getting that covenant structured correctly will enable the issuer to incur debt as the business grows and operate the business generally. But what about paying dividends or making investments outside the credit group? In this video, I will discuss the restricted payment covenant. The restricted payments covenant is designed to prevent cash and assets from being transferred outside the credit group, except in certain circumstances. Cash that leaves the credit group, which is often referred to as leakage, is bad for investors because it won't be around to service the debt or satisfy the bonds in the event of a default. It is gone, and the restricted payments covenant controls situations under which cash or other value can leave the credit group. Basically, the credit group needs to be doing well financially to earn an ability to make these payments. The restricted payments covenant is structured in 3 parts. First, there is a definition of what constitutes a restricted payment. Then, there is a calculation of the net income basket, sometimes referred to as the restricted payments builder basket, and the conditions under which a restricted payment may be made under this basket. And then you'll find a list of the exceptions. In other words, the instances when restricted payments may be made, even if the conditions under the net income basket are not met. As discussed earlier, once cash has been transferred out of the credit group, it rarely returns. So this covenant limits leakage unless the ability to make a restricted payment has been earned. There are a number of actions by the credit group that could be considered restricted payments, including declaring or paying cash dividends, or making other distributions of assets to stockholders, repurchasing the capital stock of the issuer, and repaying subordinated debt prior to its scheduled maturity. Making investments outside of the credit group would also be considered a restricted payment, because doing so means that assets of the credit group are being transferred to a third party. Here is a great example of why the definition of credit group and which companies are designated as restricted subsidiaries is important, because transactions within the group are generally fine. For example, acquisitions of companies that become restricted subsidiaries, capital expenditures within the group, and most intragroup loans and guarantees are not restricted, as they represent investments in the system. As I mentioned earlier, a restricted payment right must be earned. Restricted payments may only be made from net income that builds up in a restricted payments basket. Calculating the restricted payments basket requires some explanation and careful reference to the defined terms in the indenture. At its most basic level, however, the restricted payments basket is calculated by taking 50% of net income, or free cash flow, of the issuer since the issue date, less 100% of any losses and any restricted payments made. A full illustration can be found in our high yield guide, including some useful examples to show how it works. So download the guide for more information. Once you have determined that you have room in the basket to make the proposed restricted payment, you must also confirm that you can incur at least $1 of ratio debt under the debt covenant and that no default exists. So, if the company is starting to exceed its leverage limitations, then the restricted payment flexibility is taken away until it returns to its set gearing ratios. And if a default exists, then you can't transfer value out of the system. There are many practical planning situations during the structuring stage that must be considered. For public companies, what dividends have been declared but not yet paid? And what dividend expectations do equity investors have going forward? Similarly, does the company develop new projects with JV partners or minority-owned subsidiaries? These are just a couple of examples that commonly need to be considered. So, to summarize, the restricted payments covenant is designed to prevent cash and assets from being transferred outside the credit group unless the credit group's positive financial performance or improved financial condition justifies its abilities to make such payments. This video concludes our 4-part series on high-yield bonds. If you'd like more information, please download a copy of our high-yield guide, which includes examples to illustrate the more complex points. We also love to get your questions, so please feel free to send in your questions or recommendations for future video topics. Thank you again for watching.